Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for attending this session. Sorry, we're getting off to a bit of a late start, but we'll make up for it. My name is Shel Holtz. I am Director of Internal Communications for Webcor. I'll tell you a little bit about Webcor because most of you probably haven't heard of it. With the word web in it, you may be inclined to think that it's a Silicon Valley company, but in fact, we are a general contractor doing commercial construction, both public and private, in California and headquartered in San Francisco. We have built a lot of iconic structures in San Francisco. We tend to undertake big, complex projects like the new Salesforce Transit Terminal, the California Academy of Sciences, things like that. San Francisco General Hospital just finished up 5 massive structures in the largest public-private partnership in the United States out at UC Merced. So I handle internal communications there. Before that, I was independent for 21 years. I've also been director of corporate communications at a couple of Fortune 400 companies and spent several years as a communications consultant at global HR consulting firms. Started my career at ARCO as an internal communications representative, and before that was a newspaper reporter. So I've been around a while. I don't know what I just did. I stopped sharing my screen, which I didn't mean to do. So the session that we are doing today is all around this idea of employee mapping as a way to manage your communication process and develop content that is meaningful to employees, not just in general, but at the stage they are at during their career with you. And all of this emerged out of a model that I created. I unleashed this, I think, in 2017 after noodling with it for about 2 or 3 years. And I developed this model mainly for my own purposes. As a consultant working with internal communications departments, I wanted to have a structure that would sort of put context to the recommendations I was making. So I was looking for a model that essentially expressed the philosophy that I brought to my consulting engagements. The model is based on these 4 overlapping circles in the middle and the ring that encircles them. The ring are the things that you're always striving for and always doing in communication. The channels, obviously, the channels that we use to communicate. Alignment is aligning the communication with corporate strategy, corporate business plans, company objectives, things like that. Listening is obtaining the feedback that you need and keeping your finger on the pulse to know what is going on in the organization. How is the temperature of the culture, for example. Consultation, Steve just referred to this as coaching. Coaching is absolutely part of consultation, but in communications, we need to counsel leaders and managers and others in the organization on how to communicate most effectively. My view is that really only about half or even less of the communication that an internal communicator should be doing is creating content and getting content out there. The rest of it is facilitating communication in the organization from the top down, from the bottom up, laterally, all those different directions you can go. But we need to be facilitating that, because what happens so frequently, and this has to do with alignment as well, is that the messages that we send are out of alignment with the reality on the ground. So, for example, we could be sending messages that management wants us to send that says the most important thing that we need to be prioritized on here is productivity. We really need to get our productivity up. Then they find that there is a lot of breakage at a distribution center because they're working so fast, they're throwing the packages around and they're losing money. And this actually happened. A colleague of mine, Jim Schaefer, went out and analyzed it and found that the rewards that were being given, people were getting bonuses for their productivity numbers. Nobody was being rewarded or recognized for quality. And by switching the message to quality, suddenly all of the breakage stopped and they recovered a whole lot of money. So alignment and consultation become very important from that standpoint. Branding is the way we convey the organization to employees and to anybody else we may be communicating with. On the inside, we have these 4 overlapping circles. The first of these is culture. The second is engagement, employee engagement. The third is the customer experience, because employees at some level have to be engaged with customers and connected to the marketplace. And I think one failing that we see with a lot of organizations is that they don't connect people who don't have a direct connection with the marketplace to the marketplace. I think it's incredibly important that every employee understand the customer and know how their job in their function affects the customer's view of the organization and the customer's journey. And finally, there is the employee experience, EX, of course, the theme of this conference. And that's where the idea of the mapping comes in, because we really need to consider the various elements of the employee experience, but within the context, the larger context of all of these various elements of the employee experience. Went a little far there. There we go. So there it is. I knew I could do that. So this is an example of a customer journey map, which is where the employee journey map has its origins. All of the customer journey maps you will ever see are all based on the marketing funnel, and the marketing funnel is represented in this particular map by the stages at the top, right? You have awareness, consideration, acquisition. That's where they actually make the decision to buy your product. In this case, they call it service, and then loyalty. There are some that go a little deeper than that. Here's awareness, consideration, acquisition, service, and retention. But you see some of them that also get into loyalty and then advocacy. They become loyal customers. They will buy from nobody but you. Advocacy is when they start telling their friends that they have to buy from you. And if you look at both of these maps, it's not just those 5 buckets, right? They're also outlining the steps that a customer goes through under each of those phases. And then it's got the various touch points. I know you can't read all of these because it's irrelevant. We're talking about the employee journey, not the customer journey. This is just designed to show you that they break these down into smaller and smaller nuggets to figure out where the opportunities are to engage that customer. And this is for a very specific company. So this happens to be a software company. Here's one where they have the customer journey along the top, the marketing funnel, but then they've got the various aspects of the engagement that occurs under each of those. So what goals does the customer have during the awareness phase? What goals do they have during the consideration phase, and so forth? And how do we engage and market to those customers in order to make sure that we're sending messages that are going to influence them in the right way at the right time during that phase of their journey? Now, the thing about an employee journey and an employee journey map is that it is far more complex than a customer journey. And that's not to say that the customer journey can't be a very complex journey, depending on the nature of the customer and the nature of the product. It can be very complex, but just by its very nature, employee journeys are more complex. And here's the reason why. This is how we spend our lives, broken down into percentages. We spend most of it asleep, but next to sleep, we spend the next most amount of our time at work. As a customer of an organization, you may be interacting with the product or the service many times a day, but not 8 hours a day. Very rare for a customer of a product or a service to be engaged with it 8 hours a day. I suppose my office chair might fit into that category, but the fact that we are at work 8 hours a day means that we're having 8 hours a day worth of experiences. And every minute you're at work contributes to the experience that you have. And there are milestones, and we're going to get to the milestones in a minute, that every employee goes through. But there are these moments that most organizations really don't consider when it comes time to consider the way we are communicating and, in fact, engaging with all different departments in the improvement of that employee experience. Just think about every time you have to pick up the phone and call IT or human resources or accounts payable. I worked for an organization where accounts payable was an absolute delight. I didn't have in the communications function the kinds of expenses that some of my colleagues in other departments had, and my expenses were also pretty consistent, right? This is back in the early 80s, and we mainly did print because that's mainly what there was in the early 80s. And if I had a designer who cranked something special out for me, I didn't want them to wait 60 days, which was our normal turnaround on invoices, because this was not a recurring expense, and they weren't getting, $100,000 every month. This was a designer who could stand or fall based on a $5,000 invoice. So I was able to walk it over there and say, could you process this quicker than the 60 days? And they always would. That made my experience great because it made my vendor very happy, which made me very happy. And they were willing to do more for me because they got paid more quickly than the system was supposed to allow for. So that was a great experience. But we've all had experiences where we've interacted with whoever picks up the phone from whatever department, and all they're going to do is give you grief, because they look down on you because you haven't figured out that you're supposed to reboot before you call them. Try that first. Or they're going to be dismissive of your HR complaint and think you're just whiny. Those are all going to color your experience, right? Interactions with the boss have an incredible impact on the employee experience. We know that if every time you go to the boss, they're going to give you a hard time, or they're drunk, or whatever it may be, that happens every day. And you've heard the line, most likely, that people don't quit their jobs, they quit their bosses. I've seen data that suggests that's not as true as that makes it sound, but absolutely something to keep in mind is the boss is somebody that most employees interact with on a regular basis. How often are you doing check-ins with employees as the boss? Employees really appreciate this. If you only find out once or twice a year how you're doing, and then you get a bad performance evaluation and don't get a good raise because nobody told you that you had to make these corrections, you're not going to be having the greatest experience in the history of employment. So we have to keep in mind that how managers manage has this tremendous impact on the experience. What are people hearing from leadership? How comfortable is the workplace? And here I don't mean cushy sofas to sit on. I mean, what kind of comfort is there for you being there? Are you able to bring your best self to work every day, or are you uncomfortable being there for whatever reason? How difficult is it for you to access your benefits? What are your interactions like with your colleagues? There are all kinds of little things that organizations offer. Where I work, we offer volunteer days off. So 2.5 days every year you can take to go out and do some work in the community. We also offer days off for wellness. If you meet certain criteria, you say you walk 10,000 steps a day for a month and record that, you can get a wellness day off, and you get 2 of those. And yeah, I can guarantee you, if we ever took that benefit away, you would hear howls, even though a small percentage of the organization actually takes advantage of it. They would make it known throughout the organization they were dissatisfied with that takeaway. So you can see that there are all these interactions that employees have on a daily basis that color the employee experience. So just to summarize this part of the presentation, the customer journey, and when you really start to create one for your organization, you're going to find it's not something that you can do from a template. You really do have to look at who your customers are and what their needs are. But you can see this is the basic full-fledged customer experience. The employee experience is going to be longer, even when you just look at the milestones. What was the recruiting process like? What was the onboarding process like? What's it like getting an evaluation? Does your boss give you feedback on a regular basis? In fact, I just wrote a post on the leadership blog in our organization about a guy who has come up with a question guide for his one-on-ones with employees. Our company guideline is, as a manager, you're supposed to do a one-on-one with the individual members of your staff every 6 to 8 weeks. This guy does it every 4 weeks because he benefits from it. His employees benefit from it. He sends them the question list before the session so they can already be thinking about their answers. And the employees all love it because they're always on track, and he's always aware of what's going on in their lives and what they're looking for in the progression of their careers. So what's that first year like? A lot of people leave in the first year to 3 years because what they find is that the reality of the job does not match up with the promise that was made during the recruiting period. So that first year to 3 years becomes really important. What about training and development? Are you being given the opportunity to use your skills? Are you being given the opportunity to learn new skills? Does the organization's culture and values, do they fit your own? Can you support those? Or do you come to work every day rolling your eyes at it? Are you being recognized adequately? One of the questions that we have in the Pulse polls is, has somebody recognized you for good work in the last 2 weeks? And a couple of projects find that no, people are saying, no, nobody's recognized me in the last few weeks. That led one of our managers down in Los Angeles to, as a project manager on a big hotel project, to start a recognition program that has really made a difference in the culture and the morale on that organization. What about years 2 through 8, where people are just sort of plodding along in their careers now? They're over the honeymoon period and they're just into the job. Are they getting any promotions? Are they being offered opportunities to do new things? There's retiring or leaving the organization. And one that a lot of people forget is, what do you do with those employees in terms of maintaining the relationship and keeping them engaged after they have left the organization? Can be very important. We have a group of Webcor alumni on LinkedIn that we can reach out to when we're recruiting or looking for the kind of support and information that would help us with a particular issue. I think I should have probably said, ask questions. If you have questions, I'll answer those as I roll along. So here is the basic roadmap for an employee journey map. It starts with the recruiting and the onboarding, and that would include how do your employees initially become aware of your organization. And I'll tell you the truth, that's why social media in our organization is part of the employee communications function. It is because we know that most of what we are doing externally is designed to make us appear, as we are, a great place to work, so that people will want to come work here, or at least check out the jobs that we have available. So that's how we target most of our social media activities, along with the fact that we know through our employee communication survey that about 40% of our employees follow the company on social media. So it is an opportunity to reach people who may not be paying as much attention to the intranet or to the various email newsletters that go out. You have the management of performance. So that's the kind of boss I have and how they're handling the management of my performance. Career development. Am I advancing? Am I getting the training and the learning that I anticipate or that I need? What about a promotion? Am I finding new roles and new things to do? Am I being recognized? And finally, my leaving the organization. Now, what you're going to end up doing is filling in lots of spaces in between each of those with those day-to-day interactions and things that typically happen to different employees at different stages of their career. And you really want to look at doing this for multiple types of employees. And this is where the employee persona comes in. You want to create as many personas as are necessary to be able to develop communications that are appropriate to each category of employee at each stage of their career. Don't use demographics for something like this. Age and gender are not really going to help you target the information. You want to focus on the interactions different people have with the organization. So what are the key roles? Clearly, an engineer is going to have a different journey than a marketer is going to have, and that journey is going to be different from the journey an accountant has. So what are the key roles in the organization? That's where you're going to want to come up with the persona. And if it is possible to apply a gender or age or something like that, say the typical accountant is a 34-year-old married woman with children, because that's what the demographics say. Yeah, okay, go ahead and consider that. But it shouldn't be what drives the demographic. That really ought to be the it really ought to be the interactions that they have with the organization. Question here, should feedback be taken at the end of every communication, or should it be a quarterly and yearly survey? In terms of, that's a great question. Radhika, I hope I pronounced that right. I like doing a quick poll after every major communication. Not every communication. I mean, we have a daily email that goes out with the most important thing happening the next day, or the most important news that we have to report from the day. They're nice and short. I don't want to do research for every one of those. But if we have an all-company meeting, if we have a major announcement go out, I will do a random survey of about 100 employees. And it's a quick poll just to find out if the message reached them in a way that would result in influencing them. So a few questions about how the message got their attention, a few about whether it was relevant to them, and then a few about what they're going to do about it. So just a few questions, we're able to pull those together and say, oh, we failed at the attention level or the relevance level, or wow, this really did capture their attention. It was relevant to them, and look, their behavior changed. There's nothing better to take to management than to say, yeah, that message that we sent out, people are changing their behavior in support of that message. But I think a yearly survey is what you're going to do for your benchmarks. So, for example, our first annual survey that we did when I was there asked questions, for example, about how much you hear from your manager about the things that the leadership are talking about. And it was terrible. In fact, we had one comment that said, the leaders of the organization are great communicators. My manager, not so much. So that led us to establish the managers in the company as a discrete audience for communication. And in the second survey we did, we had mammoth improvement I mean, we're talking 20, 30% improvements in employees saying their managers were now sharing the information that leaders were. And of course, we don't want them parroting that information. We want them to translate it, interpret it, so they're explaining what it means to the team at that manager level. Use this information to establish that persona, and then map the interactions for each persona. So you're going to end up with that, the basic funnel filled in between with interactions that are going to be unique to each of the personas that you've created. And then include a means of obtaining feedback at each stage, right? So if somebody just got promoted, get some feedback. If somebody has raised their hand and volunteered, find out how that volunteer activity went. And then, the engagement survey results ought to be factored into all of this as well. Here's an example of a persona. This is a sales manager in North America. Probably most of them are women, and it covers just the first year, which shows you how detailed these maps can get. So the pre-employment, first week orientation, first 6 months acculturation, and 7 to 12 months integration. And you can see that they're talking about what are the objectives and needs, what are they doing, and who are they collaborating with, and how they're doing it, tools and information, what are they thinking and feeling at this time typically, and what barriers are they encountering, what opportunities are being presented to them. You get detailed like that. And then understand what happens statistically at some of these milestones. For example, at 1 to 3 years, people, as I mentioned before, that's where you lose a lot of new employees because the job just doesn't align with the promise that was made to them through all of the recruiting. On employees' work anniversaries, the data says that job hunting increases 9% when an employee's reaching that anniversary, especially milestone anniversaries like 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And that's because it's, oh my God, I've been here that long. Look how this is going. I need to find something new. Job hunting actually increases 12% on birthdays. So what are you doing for employees' birthdays? Every birthday I get something from the company in the mail. I mean, it's a card that's signed by the executive team, but it's a tangible expression of their appreciation that I'm here. And that would probably reduce my desire to look for a new job. At 5 years, people are looking at whether they've had an opportunity to advance or if it looks like they're going to have an opportunity to advance. So these are all things to start building into that journey, because you're going to have to figure out where to communicate on those. Understand the other reasons employees leave so that you can figure out where in the journey these apply. Bad or unprepared managers is probably one of the top reasons. Managers who don't check in with their employees, who are not mentoring them and coaching them. If the growth opportunities are limited. If the company seems backward compared to what you're hearing from your colleagues at a competing organization. If the policies are so rigid, you just can't move. If the corporate mission isn't clear, you're not sure why you're doing what you're doing. Work-life balance is suffering, or the company's purpose isn't something that motivates you. And increasingly these days, a purpose is very important. Now, these all get aligned to the employee journey map. Here's an example of one that starts with discovery, goes through onboarding, training, just the world of work, rewards, mobility, breaks, and your exit from the organization. And then down the other side, you have the touch points, the emotional curve that goes through each of those stages, what the needs of the employees are, what your insights are, and then what the opportunities are for engaging those employees. So you would have one of these for each of those persona. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that this all sounds like it's not the communicator's job to be establishing the map of the journey for employees. That sounds like something HR ought to be doing. And you will get no argument from me. But I do think that if your organization hasn't developed these maps, you should try to influence HR. And if HR is not interested, maybe undertake it on your own. There are consultants out there who can help you develop all of these. But you want to play an active role in the mapping because you're going to use it extensively. Help correlate survey results and other employee feedback with stops on the journey, right? So you're going to figure out where we're going to look at how employees responded to this from the feedback that you're getting. And it doesn't have to be through a survey. There are all kinds of feedback mechanisms. My friend Mark Schumann turned me on to this thing he was doing when he was vice president of culture at Sabre. He called it the Culture Club. And it was a group of volunteer employees. He would pull a few of them together every week for an hour and throw a question at them about the state of the culture. And they would talk about that. And then he would send a 2-minute audio clip. It was sort of an internal podcast to all managers saying, this is how employees are feeling about this particular issue, so that managers could make sort of mid-course adjustments to their behavior based on that. That's as valid of feedback as you're going to get from pulse polls or surveys. But you're going to help establish the key milestones on the map based on communication insights, the way that we treat those and what employees experience at those milestones. And we want to make sure to include post-employment. So once the maps have been drawn, this is where communicators really get involved, because now you're going to identify the key challenges and the issues that have been identified on that map. That's a guide for content development, right? I mean, not solely, of course. There's going to be content that you're going to develop for other reasons that are also reflected in that overarching model that I showed you at the beginning. And I should probably just digress here for 10 seconds and tell you that I am writing a series of blog posts on that model. There are 25 of them up right now. And if you just go to my blog, which I have a link to at the end of the presentation, you'll be able to find it. It's the new model for employee communication. I think I only have 4 posts to go before I have that whole thing done. But you want to make sure that you are writing content that these people will see based on who they are and where they are in their journey. This doesn't mean that you have to write this and not have it available for everybody. It could be relevant for other reasons to other people, but it is sort of a box that you want to check, is that I have this article that we did on the completion of this major project is also an opportunity to address these people on this stage of the journey. In my organization, it might be the effectiveness of the superintendents on the project as an opportunity for recognition as a milestone project comes to an end. So we want to make sure we're doing that. We also want to make sure that based on where people are on the employee journey, we have tags related to those so that we can tag every article, every piece of content. So when employees go searching for stuff, those come up, relevant material to where they are on their journey, and what information they're looking for is easily found. So it becomes the communicator's job in part to be an explainer, because if confusion diminishes the experiences, we can clear it up. We do a performance management process at Webcor called Calibration. And as many times as I have watched the HR team present calibration as a PowerPoint slide in a webinar kind of like this one, the feedback I get is that most employees still see it as a voodoo process and they don't get how it works. So I did an article that outlined the process step by step, and I couldn't believe the feedback this article got. It was like, finally, somebody told us what this thing really is. You have the opportunity to do that. It's not news. It's not a feature. It's an explainer. And support the teams that influence the journey, right? If you pick up the phone to call HR and you get this, condescending person who doesn't really seem interested in your problem, and that influences your experience, then that's an opportunity for communications to work with that team to improve their communication skills and their encounters with employees in order to ensure that the experience is a good one. We want to honor employees when they have their key milestones. In fact, just before I started this session, because today is October 1st, I uploaded the service anniversaries to our digital signage. So people, wherever they go, they're going to see the names of the people who are having their anniversaries that month. And that includes mine. I started October 27th, 2017. We've already talked a bit about coaching business unit leaders, and I can't emphasize this enough. One of the things that I did when we went through a purpose exercise with the executive team, we decided the organization really needed to have a solid purpose, is to create a repository on the intranet for the leaders where they can go grab different pieces, different elements of what went into developing that purpose so that they can tell the right stories to their employees. And I coach them on telling those stories. And I coach them. One of them does a monthly video with his team, the Northern California operations team, to just say, hey, this was great this last month. Here's what's coming this month. It's less than 2 minutes, but the staff loves it, and it gets that recognition out there, and it also helps employees understand what's going on in the organization, so there's a lack of confusion or skepticism or uncertainty in the organization. And be sure to take a look at those neglected journey milestones, like how the company handles employee departures, and again, is there engagement after employment? When I worked at ARCO, we had a copy of the employee newspaper. This was 1977. I started there, that went to all retirees. We even had retiree clubs in some cities. People actually went out to get together with their former employees. Now, obviously, you're not going to want to create one template for all employees. If you use an intranet or an email tool that allows you to target, there may be times that you want to do that. You can slot an article into your intranet and say, this should only go to project engineers, or this should only go to support employees. That's great, because as Steve and Cindy were saying, it's a bit of a downer, a definite strain on the employee experience if you're inundated with content that doesn't matter to you. So make sure that you are getting the information to the people who need it. But I know that in a lot of organizations, the resources aren't there. And again, the idea here is not necessarily to create a bunch of original content just for these purposes, but to make sure that your content mix addresses these purposes at some level. So at least the right people on the right on the stage of the journey that they're on are going to get this message, as others in the company are extracting other meaning from that content that you have produced. So I don't see any other questions, but now is the time if you have one. Excuse me, I've been dying to take a drink since about 5 minutes after I started. Oh. While I'm waiting, I'll give you my coordinates. So I still have my own site. It's less of a marketing site now that I am on the client side, but still has my blog. So if you go to Holtz.com, you can find my blog series on the new model for internal communication. But it looks like there are no questions. If you have questions after we have left this session, if you email me, I will answer them and get them back to you. And in fact, I'll share them with Jessica for this session and make sure she shares them back out with all of you. So if you do have questions, feel free to send them my way. Thanks, everybody.